Hey, what is up, Omni Athletes? If you have not registered yet for the 2019 Future of Sport Conference, do it today. Go to live.theomniathlete.com. This conference is truly going to transform the way you look at sport, the way you compete in sport, and if you are a coach or a leader who's working to bring sports consciousness into your team, into your organization, into your client base, whoever it is that you serve, and you need help building that bridge in translating the practices of higher consciousness, the practices of meditation, mindfulness, EFT, training principles around energetics and embodiment, and how that all translates into athletic performance and in a way that you can communicate its value, and by extension, the value you deliver in being able to bring that work to sport and to the world. This is the conference for you to be at. We are going to have an incredible list of speakers and teachers that all have gone through the journey of translating that work, that value, that power into athletic performance and into peak performance for sport, for life, through movement. So be there July 19th through 21st in San Francisco. The Future of Sport Conference. Go to live.theomniathlete.com to register today. Grab your ticket. We'll see you guys in San Francisco. Welcome to another episode of Omni Athlete. We created this show and company to empower your performance with the wisdom and techniques of the world's highest achieving body, mind, and spirit competitors. Okay, so today's guest is an elite strength, conditioning, mobility, and health coach who's on a mission to empower his clients to express their optimal humanity and be the hero of their own journey. A chronic health battle challenged him to spend the last 15 years pushing his mind and body to the edge of their limits in order to heal. His journey, transformation, and passion have led him to synthesize and learn as much as he could from the fields of evolutionary biology, anthropology, nutrition, neuroscience, functional medicine, and human movement. He's one of the first Wim Hof method master instructors, has studied traditional indigenous use of psychedelic plant medicine in Peru, and draws on a breadth of high-level coaching certifications to guide his clients towards superhuman health and wellness. It's my pleasure to introduce the Omni Athlete, Daniel Cortez. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. This is really exciting. And we were having a really fun conversation off camera, which we're going to come back to. But the place I actually wanted to start, I was listening to an interview you did, and you mentioned this idea of outsourcing. It was talking about movement, and you mentioned this idea of how we outsource at times movement to something like a chair or a couch. And I'm jumping right in here. And the thing that I'm really curious to understand from your perspective as athletes, right? As we look at the lens of sport, what elements of movement do you see athletes outsource that they may not need to, or that might not be optimal for their performance?
Well, I think one of the big things that we make a mistake with is the distinction that we don't need to make sometimes, and all the time, sometimes, between athlete and regular person. What we really need to be thinking about is human first, right? And then we need to be thinking about all of the problems that modern Western civilization causes humans. Specifically with respect to movement, we don't move very much. We have this idea that athletes move a ton. Well, some athletes move a lot, but usually in very specific ways, repetitively. And there are actually many athletes who move a lot compared to sedentary Western people, but they don't actually move that much. They move at very high intensities for a short amount of time.
Sure.
And so what I was talking about in that particular podcast was what is really applicable to athletes. So I would say is when we think about athletes, if you are listening to this and you are an athlete, or if you're a coach of an athlete, think of yourself as a human first, and then an athlete with specific needs that is different maybe from the rest of the population after that. So the first thing is everyone is they're maladapted to their modern environment. So if we think about it like that, we've got to think, well, what is it that human beings have been doing for almost all of existence? A great place to look at this is the work of Katie Bowman, who wrote a fantastic book called Move Your DNA and has a podcast called Nutritious Movement. And she's done a great job as a biomechanist of illuminating the nature, the relationship between physics and movement and your biology and your health at the cellular level. So I would just say is that we have to move like hunter-gatherers as closely as we can. We have to mimic that. And then when you're an athlete, take note. Let's say you're a cyclist, right? A cyclist is doing something that is not at remotely a normal human movement.
Yeah.
Cycling is very, very recent, and you're not loading your hips at all. And your thoracic spine is constantly, and your lumbar spine for the most part is constantly crunched over in a global flexion. So you have got to be mindful of that the rest of the time when you're not doing that activity. You should be spending lots and lots of time in opposite or other positions that you don't spend any time in. So I would say human first, and then think about the specific needs of the athlete. If you're a coach or if you are an athlete, think about, hey, what is it that I'm doing all the time?
There is an awareness that we generate when we ask those kinds of questions, but as people and specifically as athletes, we think of, okay, I'm at the gym, I'm in practice, I'm in a training session. Okay, my critical thinking around performance stops when I leave, or at least it changes. It does, especially with the body, right? If we're talking about the body, most of us don't apply that level of critical thinking outside of that athletic space. So that, one, is really energizing to hear. And two, I think there's a question of how do we begin to cultivate more awareness like that?
Well, one thing you can do is you can read, someone like Katie Bowman's books, who talks at, it was again, one of the things that struck me about Omni Athlete when you and I talked to set this up is, I'm an integral thinker. Ken Wilber's on the board, right? Omni Athlete is an integral systems thinking organization. Yeah. So what we need to try to do as coaches or as athletes is become integral thinkers if we aren't integral thinkers already. And we need to think in very big systems, right? Which is essentially more or less what it means to be an integral thinker anyway. So in doing that, we need to always look to learn from other people who think in that way. It doesn't have to be necessarily our model. In fact, it's always useful to learn from people who don't think exactly the same way as you. But to cultivate that kind of awareness, you have to go start to purposely look at people who, like Bowman, as an example, who are thinking in this very 10,000-foot view about how to cultivate a lifestyle that includes your activity. It is not just based on your activity, right? So when I'm coaching an athlete, because I coach a lot of regular people or people who are successful business people, and sometimes I coach athletes, right? So they all have things that they're specializing in and that they spend an inordinate amount of time doing relative to the rest of the population.
Sure.
But we still have to take the same very large 10,000-foot view before we zero in on what it means to be a human, before we zero in on dealing with the specific movement needs or the specific nutrition needs of excelling at a particular task, right? Because healthy human beings have always been generalists for the most part, particularly with respect to movement. And there's a whole movement, no pun intended, now that literally that's basically devoted to this kind of thinking. It's called movement culture, which was invented by the Israeli coach Ido Portal, who's probably the most famous movement coach in the world now, because he's the coach of Conor McGregor, who's the biggest UFC fighter in the world. And so the idea being that, there is a massive circle called movement, and there's only a little circle called exercise in movement, right? So to cultivate, to your question directly, to cultivate this understanding, you've got to seek out teachers, both to learn from in person, or to learn from like me online, or to learn from like you in a podcast format, or Bowman in a book, who are thinking about this. And then you have to design a lifestyle that takes all this into account.
From the athletes that you've worked with, and I think this probably applies just to anybody that you have worked with that really pushes and wants to develop that deeper connection with their body, what are some of the barriers that you've seen to developing an integral lifestyle, to really mapping a lifestyle first from that 10,000-foot view of what does it mean to be a healthy human, a fulfilled human, and then drilling down? What keeps us from doing that?
I would say that the biggest obstacle is the fact that to build an integral lifestyle and to do the things that you're most well adapted to is in direct conflict with almost everything that you learn growing up and almost everything that we accept as quote unquote normal in modern society. So let's just take the example of sitting down as opposed to sitting in a chair, which was, I think, the example that we started off with. Like, you're outsourcing your movement to the chair. You're not supporting yourself, right? You're just kind of slumped in the chair. And you do this when you drive. So let's say, I used to live in LA. You drive for a couple hours, let's say a lot of people do in work to go to work in LA. So you've now outsourced that and you're continuing to move into the same position in your lumbar spine, or you're not getting any movement there. You're just static. You're just staying there. And then you might do that at work. And then you might do that on the car to go home. Even if you're an athlete, let's say you're doing that to drive to practice. And then you might be stuck sitting on the bench for a tiny bit. And then you might go do it home. And then you're like, man, I'm dead tired. I just had a hard ass workout. Maybe you're going to watch Netflix. And that's your recovery, quote unquote, right? And so what we're doing was we're stacking up behavior that we don't have good biological adaptation for, that is not healthy for us. And it's really hard to get anyone to say, human beings have always, up until very, very recently, have basically sat on the floor and constantly shifted position and moved. And that's extremely healthy for you and drives down chronic inflammation and builds resiliency and mobility in your joints, when that is completely the opposite of what you've learned your whole life. And it would be completely the opposite, like when your friends come over, for example, and you're the one sitting on the floor and they're the ones sitting on the couch, which long-term will have massive impacts on your your hip mobility, for example. That's hard to get people to buy into. It's just you're doing something that's totally different.
There's this really interesting, I don't know if notion or what comes to mind for me is that, especially as a young athlete, we get done training, we get done after a game, and there is this sense that we need to pause, right? That recovery means stationary. And certainly there's a part of recovery that includes letting that reintegration occur. But what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, and what we've heard before that's really energizing, is there's a recovery through movement. There's a recovery through exertion. There's a recovery that doesn't mean stop moving and become static.
Well, there's a few things to touch on with that, because that's such a great, it's an open-ended, but really it leads to a lot of really important things, right? One is human beings, they toggle between states, right? So, your heightened nervous system state, let's say, and then you finish the activity and you relax. Sprinters are kind of probably the best at this, because their activity teaches them that they must go really, really, really fast, and then they must relax. They cannot stay and be really effective. They cannot stay in this kind of heightened state of arousal for long after it's done, even in practice, because they don't recover enough to go really, really fast again. And human beings, as well as a bunch of other animals, maybe all animals, to be fair, need to excel at that to achieve optimal health. So there's the one problem, which is that you toggle, back and forth. We all toggle back and forth between states, but getting better at immediately dropping down into recovery after something that's difficult, after this heightened state of nervous system arousal, is really important, but it's hard to do. Now, how do you begin to think about how to do that? What I do is, interestingly enough, this is actually informed by my psychedelic work. So I teach people, which is very difficult to do sometimes without meditation and or psychedelic therapy experience, but I teach people to be the thing that changes. So if you view yourself as the thing that changes itself, well, first of all, that's scientifically accurate, right? So your cells are not going to be the same in 6 months or a year as they are now. You literally won't be the same thing. But if you teach yourself to view yourself as the thing that changes, then you become very open and accepting that you will change, and that change is good, and that you are constantly moving down a path that you have decided, you have agency over the path you have decided to walk down. And this is, getting into like the hero's journey and these kinds of things. But the point is that you can apply, once you've ingrained this mindset can apply to many things. It can apply to, in the more obvious case with psychedelics, letting go of, let's say, traumatic things, right? You think of yourself as the thing that changes, therefore you don't have to hold on to some kind of identity that is potentially harmful to you. But also, when you think about just where your question was coming from, when you think about performance, where you're doing something and then you have to come down and actively recover instead of just sit on your ass and watch Netflix.
Right.
If you have ingrained the mindset of think of yourself as the thing that changes, then you are constantly trying to elicit the best possible change, right? But if you think of yourself as a static thing, then it doesn't really make sense to you that much why you would want to actively do much, right? It's like it doesn't really make intuitive sense to you. Like, okay, so I need to do this, then I need to actively do this, because the person is stuck in the mindset. The athlete in this case is stuck in the mindset of the thing that is really important is the game or the exercise or the training, and I did that, and that's what I am. I'm the thing that does the hard thing. And you're not. You're the thing that changes itself on a path with a specific, moving towards a specific ideal or a specific goal. And as long as you think about it like that, then you just you go down that path, you continue to kind of sharpen your sword, and you will have a great sense of kind of purpose and purpose, I would say, in your life. But if you think of yourself as this static thing, you become a thing that cannot shed pieces of unwanted identity, and you can't toggle back and forth between I'm working really hard, I'm the athlete, right? And now I have to do something else, something different. Right? It's not so easy to do that. So you have to have a template with which to view the world that allows yourself to constantly change, constantly shift state. And so I teach people to basically be the thing that changes itself, right? And then embrace this kind of going down the hero's journey or going down this path. The path includes the highs of hard training and then the deep, deep relaxations of active recovery. And they're just parts of the same path.
So what comes up for me and what is really interesting is the way you put that, Daniel. I had never thought about, we talk about emotional trauma, psychological trauma, and physical trauma for athletes quite a bit. And what you demonstrated to me right there is that we are carrying, very literally, like we're carrying these pieces, whether it's an experience, whether it's stored in our body and we're not even conscious to it, like we're carrying these pieces of ourselves from a past that may not serve our future. And especially as athletes, we see that show up on the field all the time, right? We might be carrying the last play with us. We might be carrying an injury. We might be carrying any number of traumatic experiences that impede showing up in this moment as the thing that changes itself. So in your experience, what really allows somebody, in addition to this shift in paradigm, what allows somebody to begin letting go of those pieces that no longer serve as we move towards really performing at a more optimal level?
I think for most people, it requires some sort of deep practice, which allows you to overcome this one of the ramifications of evolutionary mismatch, which briefly is the idea that your genes expect, essentially, they're well adapted to an environment that really no longer exists because something about your environment changed too rapidly for your evolutionary hardware to catch up. And so this is a completely accepted biological term, and it, in my opinion, it is the driver of modern Western disease. And so many of the things we suffer from political divide to nutritional issues and autoimmune disease, et cetera, are the result of this, in my opinion. And so you have to, the reason why, Buddhists and Taoists have been meditating for a long time, and the reason why more and more people are being drawn to psychedelics, and why Michael Pollan just wrote the book How to Change Your Mind, which is a bestseller, and he's even gotten on like mainstream shows like NPR and Colbert. And the reason why all this stuff is happening is because even if people aren't delineating it exactly the same way I am right now, people understand that there are problems that we need specialized solutions like this to. And so I think that not everyone is a good candidate to do serious psychedelic work, right? And of course, to do it legally requires travel. So, but everyone can develop other types of practices. Breath work has basically, I was just in San Francisco doing a podcast about altered states that are not induced by psychedelics, because there is a safety element and a legality element to these things that are really important. But lots of people can get massive benefit from altered breathwork practice, holotropic breathwork, or in my case, I kind of specialize in the Wim Hof method breathwork. And everyone can pick up a meditation practice. My favorite is Sam Harris's Waking Up meditation app. I think it's the best thing that's out there right now, particularly when it comes to building and teaching a meditation practice, because it's a course. So everyone needs to do that. In my opinion, it's not really negotiable. But not everyone is a good candidate for the serious psychedelic work.
What makes somebody a good candidate or not? And what is actually, we'll stop there. I have a question, but it's not related. So what delineates those two?
The psychedelics and the breath work?
Yeah. Well, and what makes somebody a good candidate for psychedelic work?
Well, first of all, do you have anybody in your near family history or in your own past where you've noticed, or someone has commented that maybe you have some mental instability? And there's no shame in any of that.
Sure.
Obviously, there's no shame in any of that, right? There's a variety of factors, both genetic and environmental, which might lead to that. But these things are deeply destabilizing in a lot of ways to a lot of people. So if that is the case, then just maybe that's not the thing for you, and that's okay. So I would say if anything like that is true, then that person would not be a good candidate. If a person is not prepared to do a lot of preparation work and a lot of research into where they should go and to developing a framework, I always say this, but it's almost never done in the modern Western world, because it's anathema to us, right? And that is, you have to develop a framework of understanding the world where these things are tools that have a place. So a buddy of mine who I was hanging out with, who doesn't have this kind of experience, but he's a very bright guy, and he spent a lot of time in Jamaica, right? So he was like, what you're saying, it totally makes sense, because I've hung around a lot with Rastafarians. And the thing with Rastafarians is that everyone knows them in the United States. It's kind of like a punchline for, using a crazy amount of weed.
Sure.
Right. But actually, if you go to, they have complete legal protection in Jamaica, and weed's legal. And I believe psilocybin mushrooms are legal in Jamaica as well, because in their world, they authentically have a place in that belief system for that thing as a plant. And it is not the default to use it as a distraction or to use it the same way we use a pharmaceutical, which is now popular in the states where weed's legal. Right. So people are just replacing. It's like, this is my medicine. It's like, no, you're just using it like a pharmaceutical. This is not a thing that you don't have an integral view of the world. And as a result, you are just basically grab bagging. And so I would say that when you go to do psychedelic work, unfortunately, almost no one that goes to work has an integral view of the world, where the psychedelic plants have a place in that world that gives it explanatory power.
Yeah. And when you say a place, you mean this is a tool to elicit this next step in my journey, this next path or piece of my path that I'm going to, not as a solution, but as a process, as a tool.
Yes. So again, if you used my way of looking at the world, and you said, as I explained to my clients, you are the thing that changes itself, then these tools, these psychedelics are simply tools, right, to get at further change along the path towards the higher ideal. If you don't have that, which in my experience, almost no one that goes to this work does, you can have really good experiences. You can. I mean, but you can also have deeply destabilizing ones, which are dangerous. And you can also have ones where you continue to be opened because, at least in the psychedelic research, you move more, one standard deviation on average, more open in your personality after these experiences. So you become more and more open, but you don't have any kind of grounding. So it's very common to meet people in that world they're very open and they're very kind, but there seems to be they're kind of floating away. There seems to be no grounding in any kind of world of objective reality based on evidence and reason. And so that's a problem. That's a problem because you begin to struggle with interacting in the world, and you don't want that either. That's not that helpful to you.
Daniel, this is energizing, and it connects so many pieces that we end up connecting tangentially, and it's really integrating right now. But before I ask my final question, where can these guys go to connect with you online?
So you can find me at Daniel Cortez Coaching on Instagram and Facebook. If you go to the Instagram, you look at the link in the bio, there's links to all my workshops. There's my website, my newsletter, which I encourage people to sign up to. It's called The Limitless Human. And my website is danielcortez.com. And so if you want to work with me, either go and apply through the Instagram or through the website. And I only take a few clients at a time because it's almost all of my work. And if you want to reach out for podcast, public speaking, or workshop, or retreat, or whatever, you do that through those two channels as well.
Awesome. So this show is called Omni Athlete because we want to understand what it takes to be the ultimate body, mind, and spirit competitor. The final question of the show is, what does it mean to be an Omni Athlete to you?
I think it means to be an integral thinker and to be about the mission of expanding global consciousness through sport, right? And I'm less involved, I guess, in sport because than I was when I was younger. I'm still involved and I still train people, and I think we talked about this offline, that I'm getting more and more into this kind of big picture movement capacity, both in my work and also my personal life. So I'm starting up martial arts again, which I did when I was younger, started jujitsu and stuff like that. And to me, it's really all what separates Omni Athlete is this integral thinking approach. I mean, what other kind of sports, like sports, nutrition, etc., performance related place is going to have Ken Wilber on the board? It's like, that's a special thing to a person like me who thinks that's one of the main things we're missing in the world. And that if we want to figure out solutions to modern beings' problems, we have to become integral thinkers. We have to have integral thinkers lead us. We have to have integral thinkers be our doctors and our shamans and our coaches. So anything that is authentically promoting that, I think, is just special. I think it's spectacular. So I applaud it. I think it's a wonderful mission.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you for being on the show. Guys, go check out the work that Daniel is doing. Check out his social and the content he's producing. One of the most energizing pieces of Daniel's work as you dive into it is just the breadth of knowledge he can connect and the dots that he can connect that feel so authentic when you see them put in front of you. But so often as athletes, as competitors, and especially as coaches, we end up allowing to be disparate parts of this whole that we don't see connections to. So when you dive into Daniel's work, you're going to feel that right away, that these pieces are all part of an integral whole. And that is what it takes to be a performer at the level that we're talking about here at Omni Athlete. So go check out the work he is doing. And until next time, thank you guys for watching and listening to this episode of Omni Athlete.
Hey, what is up, guys? Thank you for watching another episode of Omni Athlete. Please go like and subscribe to our podcast. That is our goal right now, is just to build this community as big as we possibly can. And we need your help to do it. So like and subscribe, share our content, guys. If this content adds any value to your world that helps you perform, connect, go deeper, go wider, whatever it is that it does for you, if it provides value, all we ask is that you share our content and help grow this community. We can't accomplish our goal of elevating global consciousness through sport without you. You are an integral part of this mission and this purpose, and we need your help. So please go like, subscribe, and share our content, and continue to help us build and grow this community that is truly motivated to not just elevate consciousness, but elevate and shift the very culture of sport so that we can truly experience the athletic experience in a brand new and energizing way for so many people, guys. So thank you, and please like and subscribe. Until next time.